Hi everybody, I'm here with Dennis Muren, the Senior Visual Effects Supervisor and Creative Director at ILM. Dennis, thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, welcome back. Last week, you asked if you could answer some questions from the fans.
Sure.
So we're just going to get started.
All right.
And Cheese, could you bring the questions over, please?
Thanks, buddy.
So our first question is from Iron Golem 101. How did you get the job at ILM?
I was living in LA and was in my mid-20s and heard that George Lucas was doing this science fiction film, and I'd never met him, and I always loved movies. So I tracked down somebody who I heard was working on it and was doing the effects that I'd met once before, and that was John Dykstra. Mm-hmm. And they were just starting up, and I asked to see if I could maybe get some work on it as a camera guy or whatever, or effects camera guy, and he said, come on over, and I did an interview, and that was it. So I walked into a place that I'd never been to, work with people who I'd never worked with before, and to meet George, and it was just a great experience and changed my life.
Before that, your background coming into ILM, the stuff that got you the job, is you had a background in stop motion animation.
In effects of all types.
In all types.
All types. I've been doing this since I was literally like 6 years old, with a still camera shooting miniatures and explosions and stop motion and forced perspectives and stuff like that. Then I got a movie camera when I was 10, and all through high school, junior high school, everything. Just did effects and had a really, I'd developed this in my mind, a way to really sort of pre-visualize stuff, because you had to do it those days, because there'd be a week before you'd see the scene you shot. You had to send it away and get it back again. So I was sort of like pretty much up on this stuff when Star Wars came along. I'd been doing it really as a hobby, but I developed a lot of skills in those years.
And so you had a reel to show, like this is what I've done.
I had a reel to show. It was all funky because the technology was from the old days, and they were developing brand new technology, which is why I wanted to work on it also, to see what this new technology was that I'd heard about, but never actually had a chance to use it.
So what inspired you when you were a kid? What made you want to make movies?
You know, I remember seeing films when I was like 5, 6 years old, the special effects films from like Ray Harryhausen and disaster movies, War of the Worlds, and those things. I was just hooked on those movies, and I have no idea why. And I'd go home and try to recreate scenes from those movies in my yard and with photo cutouts and stuff like that. And I've got no idea why. I just love that stuff, and I always have. And I self-taught. There was no classes. There were really no books, no magazines, or any way to learn it. So you just learn, nothing to read. And in LA, there were like 6 of us in all of LA that really were interested in this stuff in those days. This is like in the late 50s, early 60s. And we found each other eventually, especially when we were old enough to drive and get a car.
Kind of necessary.
Yeah,
in LA.
it is. Yeah. It is very much. It's hard to get your mom to drive you, 35 minutes every day to meet a friend or something, and vice versa, But eventually we found each other, and that we sort of taught each other how to do the work based on movies we'd seen. And that was kind of it, just doing it over and over and over again.
I read somewhere that you just found Ray Harryhausen in the book and called him up.
Yeah, Ray Harryhausen was in the LA phone book, and there were a number of other people. Bill Abbott was in the phone book, who did running the effects department. My mom knew somebody who had worked at Paramount as a grip, and I called him up, and he'd worked on War of the Worlds, and it's like, oh my God, we're talking to somebody who worked on War of the Worlds. Howard Leidecker, who I liked his explosions and stuff he'd done at Republic Pictures, he was in the phone book. So, and these guys, all of them were thrilled to have anybody call at all interested in their work, because nobody cared.
Really?
Nobody, right. There was no interest, there was no future in it. They weren't making effects films or anything. So they get a call from, like a 13-year-old kid, and, okay, come on over if you want to, sure, I don't know what. And I'd go through someone's garage, and he'd have these props from a film he had done or something, and I might recognize it. And I'm talking to like Howard Leidecker, who I'd seen his work on TV and stuff. And it's just amazing. Everybody was very nice and very open.
It's so funny how you talk about there being no future in it, and yet that job that you got at ILM is now still going.
Right, and there was no future at that time. That I thought, and we all thought, that was a 2-year job. I mean, Ken Ralston and I were the ones that had worked sort of a lot on films before, and sort of tracked these things. There were these little 2-year blips where there'd be a certain type of movie made and be gone again. And I thought that's what was going to happen here. And here we are 40 years later, and they're still doing them, and I'm still involved in it.
So that brings us to our next question from Boston Peterson. Were you thinking that the special effects in Star Wars A New Hope was going to revolutionize film? Did you think you were really onto something when you were working on that?
I didn't think so.
No?
I was thrilled to work with George and thrilled to work with the gear, and the crew was wonderful. They were a whole different type of person than I was. Car racers and stuff like that, and movie guy, real machinists and stuff like that. I just thought it was going to be a one-off, and that was sort of it. And I couldn't tell if the film was going to be any good or not. Because, we never saw much of the live action. George didn't show it to us. And he was off shooting in England. And when he was back, he was just talking to us about the effects. And he would just say the shot, here's the shot, This is the trench, and the trench model's over there. And here, put an X-wing in it, and then followed by 2 TIE ships and flying down like this. And say, okay, yes, sir, yes, sir. And the models were all around. And you kind of just shot the pieces, and then the optical guys over there, assembled them into a shot. And we did that for a year, and we had, out comes this movie, and I thought that's great, and I wish it would happen again. No idea that this thing was going to be a huge hit. No idea at all. There were 2 or 3 people working there at the OLILM. We probably had 50 people. These guys said this is going to be huge, and they're the guys that went out. One was a driver there and bought stock in 20th Century Fox and all this stuff. I had no clue, and most of us had no clue. But some did, and they were right on the money. But even then, to think it would keep going is unbelievable, that it's just gone on. And so many movies now have got these huge effect sequences. I think my generation grew up, I guess, with television and liking graphics on television, because there was early stuff going on. Flipping the channel, so our attention span got shorter. We passed that right on to our kids. They passed it on to their kids. And now you've got, 2 massive effects films coming out every week practically, and the audience just seems to want to see more and more and more. So it's extraordinary how everything has changed.
The expectation from audiences has changed.
And the industry's changed. I did some work at commercials for a while, and I went in one day, and there were all these attractive women sitting there, for an audition. But what they were doing is they were auditioning their hands, because their hands were going to be holding an M&M chocolate. The hand was going to hold the M&M chocolate. That's what they cared about. Where do you see that now? Where do you see the hand models at all?
No, now the M&Ms are running around and dancing.
Right,
and
they're all over the place talking, doing everything,
Yeah.
backflips and multiplying or whatever's going on. So the whole industry has changed, and the stuff that I had to learn on my own, you can buy books about it, and do it in your home and do far better work than I could ever do in my day, which is good. Keep changing though. Things have got to change.
So you took that knowledge that you built by just going out and doing it yourself and talking to whatever professionals you could get a hold of.
Right.
And you went into Star Wars, which had this new technology of the computerized camera motion.
Right.
How did handheld camera translate into the computer stuff that started happening?
That came probably from George having us follow footage that he'd taken from movies and from newsreels of real World War II footage or World War I footage even. And those would have a handheld look to them sometimes. So because he knew you couldn't explain this to him, he couldn't explain the dynamics, you could do a storyboard, but that didn't have any time component to it, that he found these shots in advance for movies and sort of plugged them in and built the sequence and then showed those shots and then took them apart. They said, here's the shot. So we wouldn't just be looking at a storyboard, we'd be looking at actual running footage, say from the Dam Busters, a movie like that, or from a World War II film that was made by John Ford, maybe documentary showing a plane flying along and blowing up and the camera like trying to follow it, something like that. So we would put those things into it. So, and that's part of what makes that show, I think, work. And a lot of the stuff that's going on work is that it's not really all planned out. I mean, he took these pieces from different things and put them together and made a movie that was like totally unexpected, almost from shot to shot, because his sources came from different places. So there was a certain amount of uncontrolled that was going on that comes through when you see the movie, that is like a combat situation that's uncontrollable when you in any sort of combat thing. So here you've got this big battle at the end of Star Wars, and you've got these telephoto lens shots and wide angle shots and shaky shots and locked off shots and stuff that if you were just designing this from scratch, you'd make it very cinematic. And it would all be planned out, and it would look probably artificial, and that's the way almost all effects movies had been done up till that time. So I think that's why you sort of thought you were seeing a movie and it was familiar, and then George comes along and you're seeing something that's fresh and new and young, and bold, and then we got a chance to work on it, not even realizing at the time, what we were doing or what he was bringing to it. It wasn't until we saw it with the audience. And
there's such a great deal of trust there in that not knowing, but being really committed to the idea.
I mean, for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just doing a job, and that was great. For him, it was not only trust, it was boldness.
Yeah,
I mean,
risky.
Risky, man, to go in and be able to say, I'm going to do this, and trust himself and all the naysayers. I guess there were a lot of naysayers around. But it was, it was amazing. I didn't know if the stuff was ever going to work at all. I was also thinking, this technology is so complicated. I could take a model and put it on a couple of wires and in front of a blue screen and slide it down and we'd get the shot in 2 hours. Well, we would have gotten something, but it would have been familiar, like a toy, no matter what we did, and it wouldn't have had the confidence that this motion control rig gave us when we were shooting those models, because we could put ourselves into those movements. The way those spaceships move. So we'd look at the storyboard and we'd look at the footage, and the shots are designed absolutely. I want the ship to go from here to here with that sort of degree of excitement and energy. We could literally program that into the camera moves and into the backgrounds. So I think that everything looks very solid. It doesn't look like it's accidental.
It looks
in that film.
And it looks real. It looks like something real that's being filmed.
I guess so. I never thought so. But other people have said it looks real to me. I've seen all these mechanical kind of artifacts that go along with the movie.
Yeah. Well,
That's the way spaceships move. I mean,
do you feel like you know too much about it to watch it that way?
You mean Star Wars?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I from the first Castle Cruise screening, it was kind of like, wow. But still, I don't know. Everybody would come out saying it's phenomenal. So I said, well, if we just done that shot a little better.
AJ Minotti asks, was there a time that there was an attempt at a high-tech solution that failed and then a low-tech solution became the right way to do it?
There was talk at the beginning of the walker sequence to build real robotic walkers that would actually walk. And I just thought that was a really, really bad idea, because it would be like building another complicated camera motion control system if it was actually going to be sort of moving. And I just pushed, we shouldn't do this. It's a bad idea. We've got this horrible deadline. The movie's got to get done. Let me do it stop motion, because I knew that. I knew the people that could do it. And George said, fine. And at least that's my memory of it. And I just set it up the way that all the the original King Kong had been set up and stuff, with big painted backgrounds, and you can put the puppets in front of them, and you can light them correctly and tweak them, because that stuff has to be lit and photographed perfect to look really, really super good. Mm-hmm. The trade-off is you don't have any matte lines or funny stuff going on that you could get, and make things look fake. But that walker sequence was so hard, I wanted to be able to see it through the camera and just have it look perfect, to get the lighting right and the angle right and everything else. So that was really an old school technology, or old, that we brought, that we used in that film, that I think really helped. And that sort of jerkiness on the stop motion made everything look more like machines, which they were supposed to be. The walkers were machines.
Yeah, it gives them this really great mechanical effect,
the
way that they're moving.
Right, instead of this sort of fluid kind of thing that you would have probably had.
So Jacob Smith asks, what's the biggest challenge you've faced in your career?
There's so many of them on every project, but I was thinking of, from a sort of an overview, it's trying to make the work look new and fresh. And it's hard to find a look to impose on stuff where it's kind of been done many times before. Often you luck out. Like we had the speeder bike chase in Jedi. How to get that to look like you're really going 100 miles an hour through a forest was a pretty tough thing to make, and then to put the bikes in and make it look like it's a kinetic, it's got a feel to it. That sort of the Steadicam solution for part of it, which is a guy holding a camera, literally walking slowly through the forest, so you don't see the path because he's not walking on a path. That added a kind of a jerkiness to it that gave it a lot of energy. That was unexpected, but gave it that new look that wouldn't have happened if we'd had total control on it. And so that was like an accident that worked out. But it did give it this fresh look, and I think it's just hard to often find a fresh way of looking at something, especially now with so many of these films being done.
We have a question here from Mr. Bob A. Feet. Oh, I see what you did there. What was the most painfully rewarding special effect or special effects you have worked on?
It's Empire Strikes Back. And that was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was far beyond what Star Wars was as far as the effects go. Many more shots, much more complicated with the light backgrounds, the snow backgrounds, and the cloud backgrounds. So the matting had to be better. So many more designs had to be done for it. So many different types of things between the walkers and the asteroid sequence. I mean, just the asteroid sequence alone, trying to bring clarity to all these rocks that are moving around, and you can't tell one from another, but you want this one to look big and this to look small, and you got a falcon flying through there. You can't tell what you're looking at. I mean, that all had to be figured out. And that's just one sequence, and there were so many of them, and we just barely got that show done. And I remember hearing that there were, in those days we used to put out 70 millimeter prints. It'd be a few of them that would go out, which are great, big quality, super prints that they make. And I think there's 30 prints out that have temporary shots in them, like about 17 temp shots that were unfinished.
Were there like animatics or
no,
just a
thank God,
description
they weren't
of
that.
what?
No. They were shot, but they didn't look very good at all.
Oh, okay.
You know, really the colors mismatched and the matte and everything, and we couldn't do it. And then, you know, we got those done like 3 days later. And so all the rest of them came out fine. But those shots are around somewhere, and I remember talking to someone and they said, "Oh, don't worry. They'll be sent to the Midwest or overseas. No one will ever see those prints." And I always wonder, you know,
They're out there.
They're out there, and they probably went right to the major cities, and everybody saw those, and that was terribly embarrassing.
Ben Wiles asks, will Dennis Muren be working on more Star Wars films?
You know, I'm working a little bit. I'm just sort of consulting, but I am kind of looking at the dailies and making comments and saying, you know, not wanting to copy the other films, but there is a world that they need to be in that needs to be true to itself. And so I sort of make suggestions.
Sort of like Obi-Wan and Empire Strikes Back and come and, well, it's not ready yet.
Maybe like that. I don't know if it's like that or not. Or maybe that slug creature that comes out of the compactor thing and looks around and goes back. Whoa, let me out of here. Goes back again.
Alexander Stevens asks, from 1976 till today, what moment stands out during your career so far?
Probably a couple. One is it's amazing to be on this Star Wars massive cultural change, and during that whole period, you know, it was really after Empire that it really clicked, because we knew we had done it twice. And then after that I went on to E.T. and then Jedi, and it's just kind of kept, so somewhere being part of this, you know, the wave of the culture or whatever they used to call it, is pretty amazing to be making all this work, you know, doing what was a hobby, doing it as work, and all these people seeing it was really a really amazing thing for me to have to go through it and still kind of be going through it. But specifically, probably as far as effects go, it's the period around the time we were doing Terminator 2 and Jurassic, when we were really trying to get the CG stuff that had been a promise for so long. We actually managed to wrangle it and get the gear to be reliable and the software to be easy enough for people to learn, for human beings to learn how to use it, and flexible enough that you could come up with an idea and a tool could kind of give you an image that you wanted, and have it be reliable and be budgetable, because the business we're working in, there's deadlines and budgets and you have to stick to them. It's not like academia where a lot of the computer stuff came from, where they could work on stuff for year after year. Our stuff had to actually work and had to deliver. So that period in there when we really learned it and sort of proved it a little bit on the Abyss, for sure on T2, and then the public went crazy when they saw dinosaurs on Jurassic. That was really thrilling. And also, just for me, as an effects lover and knowing a lot of the people who've been doing it for years, to know how thrilling it would be for all the practitioners for 100 years before to have had this tool, that, you know, you're not relying anymore on plastics and wood and gravity and wires and accidents and danger, real danger, and cutting your hand off or something. It's all your imagination. You can, as long as if you can figure it out, you can, and you've got good people working, you can pretty much do it with the computer. Pretty much make something happen. And now everything's gotten so much bigger with more shots being done and the shots more complicated and the audience has gotten so fine-tuned. It's super hard to make it look real. It was a little easier back then to make it look real. Now we're still struggling with trying to make this stuff look, up where the audience just doesn't even see it. And, we're doing it. It's coming.
You talked a little bit about how key lighting was for having things on camera and having them read as real. What do you think the trick is with using the computer tools, getting that sense of realism?
I think it's having a goal and what realism looks like, which sounds silly, but an awful lot of the people that are working in the industry now are right out of school or pretty close out of the school, and they never have learned to look around and see things and just look at it and say, look at that glare off your nose, it's a little brighter than off your forehead. If they were making you in CG, they might make those two match up. And the way it would come out is something looks funny about this. And there might be 10 other things that are funny about that too. So before you know it, I'll look at you in CG, and we've lost the moment in the movie.
It's amazing how many things we see that we don't realize we see.
Yeah, you see it in the first 2 or 3 or 4 years of your life, and that's why kids are always curious. I mean, about everything: sound, weight, appearance, all sorts of things. And then I think what it is when you realize it's not a threat, then you're okay. And then after a while, you're not thinking about the look of things; you're thinking about other things. But I've had to, and a lot of people who do this stuff, and anyone really who cares about art or about this sort of creativity has to learn how to observe things. And I've been doing it intentionally since I was really, really young. And that's what I encourage people to do, because then they have a goal. They're not just putting pieces together and turning on light and handing it to an animator to animate. Their goal is how this should look as good as it can, as real as it possibly can. So I don't know, it's hard to explain that, but me coming from a background of being able to only shoot a few photos a week and taking a long time, because that's all photography could do, couldn't afford any more than that. I think I spent a lot of time looking and observing and dreaming about how things would be with effects, and now it's so easy to see them on a monitor that I think we've lost that sort of training about how to observe things. We've learned how to use the tools, but maybe not what we should be doing with them.
So it sounds like even though the tools and the technology have so vastly changed, it's that curiosity that's at the core.
I think so, and discipline. To be able to, and a decision, deciding, I want this to look like this, or look like this, not that I'm assembling and passing it on to somebody.
See, I think you are Obi-Wan. Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you for being here talking with us and giving us your wisdom.
All right, thanks, sure.
This week on the Star Wars Show, Peter sits down with visual effects legend Dennis Muren.